you want to get early access to other right by clicking the link the people who bought your shares think that money was
money for obviously food, housing, transport, entertainment. It's so abundant that there's more, that the robots and AI are providing more goods and services than any human could possibly consume. What do you need money for?
But you're creating these robots. Are you
I guess
then
between
selling?
now and then you'll need money, sure.
Are you selling robots? Are you selling them humanoid robots? Or are you producing goods and services with the humanoid robots that you control? Are you the Levi Strauss?
I think it would probably be an exercise in vanity to perform controlling Super Genius. I think what we should try to do is I think it probably will be. What my biological is that the most important. If that.
So let's unpack that. You're sure that
It's locked.
And chimpanzee. So that long ago that we're swinging through the trees, eating bananas, and we still bananas. Trees is kind of fun. It's sort of reminiscent of the past. All-time thing, swing through the trees once in a while.
I'm with you on that. I'm definitely with you on swinging through trees. I love swinging through trees, but
It's
I
locked.
listen to you say this now because I've listened to a bunch of things that you've said over the years.
Yeah.
And 10 years ago, you were on a podcast, I think it was with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and you said that the thing that terrified you most was rapid progressive self-improvement in AIs.
Yes.
And that you said, and it really struck with me, you said that we will just be the pet Labradors at the best.
Well,
now you see...
Labrador's pretty happy creatures.
But in 2023, you slowdown in
model.
Kimi K3, yeah, the one that came out last week, is I mean, it's almost as good as Fable, right? So it's
Well, I think realistically, Fable is still clearly the smartest model. I think anyone realistically would say that that's still the case. But the Kimi model is.
have you proposed it? I mean, you could
That's what
presumably
I suggested
organize that.
to Dennis, and I guess I'll talk to Daria about it too. There's also, of course, several that are very good. The new Kimi model.
Kimi K3.
Well, getting quite close. Given that the
It's
Chinese
locked.
AI companies are they probably will have luck. There's a good chance. The constraints on AI are essentially electricity and AI chips. Very good robot companies. In fact, they have
It's
these, like,
locked.
robot sporting events. Seeing some of them.
Yes, I have. That's when I was in Beijing.
Yeah. Well, and then they have this sort of like a boxing match where fighting. I saw some video. Robot that got
It's
his head
locked.
knocked off kept fighting, even with his head knocked off. It's pretty funny, but I mean, in fact, I think the robot might digital AI and if you look at electricity production, you say like AI is a function of
I need a key.
whatever chips or electricity. China has far more electricity than the United States. In fact, China has
Greetings.
electrical equipment and everything. The rate at which AI chips are being made exceeds the rate at which new electricity is coming online. Outside of China.
Outside China.
And since China, the US have banned the export of the latest AI chips to China, China is somewhat chip starved. So
They are becoming much more efficient at using the chips that they have, and that's one of
Yes.
the striking things of PBK3, right, is how efficiently they...
and China is also. I think most people realize to solving to make AI chips at a very low cost. So I think there's, this shouldn't evolve into just a China conversation, but
I need a key.
the current constraint is infrastructure does work quite well there. And if the if and if the, and this is sort of how it works with the Motion Picture Association. You know, the and that seems to work quite well. So
I can't carry
and choose to take action.
So where there seems to be some kind of personal vitriol between some of these leaders.
Yes. Well, I'm not a fan of Sam Altman because
You're watching my interview with Elon Musk. If you want to get early access to other interviews, subscribe to The Economist.
If you started a non-profit that was meant to be an open source AI company and owned by the world, and it somehow got turned into an $800 million for-profit company, you're like, wait a second. Sam Altman because he felt, in fact, the reason he everyone I've met at Anthropic so far has been, like, no one said And also, by the way, we're going to that is natural.
So I don't need to alarm people, but I do think how quickly and to what degree
Stay a while and listen.
displace people from jobs, because it is, as you say, if in 10 years there's more intelligence, artificial intelligence than any human intelligence.
Yes.
And if you are, and if you're ahead of everyone who's in this country, so that's also going to be kind of factory work. So do you,
Good to see you.
are you closer to Dario, let's say, in your sense of the pace at which jobs are going to be displaced?
I do think it's going to be a bumpy road, because to do any job better than another person can do that job, and that will be true very quickly of jobs that for software engineering, we already have a situation where if you go to a
Good
friend's house
evening.
and they make dinner with vegetables from their garden. It's
Good
nice
evening.
So that's what
this
you
is what work is going to be
but,
like.
you know, I get that. I mean,
Yeah.
in that world, I would be hopeless because I can't garden to save my life. But I get the idea. People still like playing chess with each other. It's just you're describing a world where within 10 years, pretty much every job can be done better by an assistant. And
Yes.
you're seeing huge.
Universal high income. elsewhere in the solar system, the return, I think ultimately this would have a very high return on investment, but in the short term, we'll be spending all this money on a moon base and a Mars base, and then people are like, and I'm going to get all this pressure for like, well, you missed your earnings this quarter, you spent too much on Mars. Like, yes, in the S1 prospectus, and it's literally listed as a thing we will do. So we get to, but they still get grumpy about these things, you know?
So-
Because they're like, well, yeah, whatever, you said. What you miss, what Apple's missing. Great computers, but Apple has.
But by analogy, that's Mars. Most people think of you as the man who wants to create a colony on Mars, so we have multi-planetary civilization.
I've been saying that for such a long time.
You have, but now you seem more focused on AI and what AI will do in the next 10 years. And you sound much more excited about using the moon as a base from which to, pop out orbital AI satellites. Have you shifted your attention away from Mars, or are you as interested in colonizing Mars as you ever were?
I'm interested in the set of actions that future to the maximum degree possible. So, and the great
lot of spending, reshaped the government. How do you feel that it wasn't hugely successful in the sense that, you know, there wasn't nearly as much spending cut as you tried? How do you, as you look back on that, do you regret getting so involved in politics? Do you think it was a good thing to do?
I think I got a little too involved in politics, got carried away. So the you know the goal with the sort of Doge stuff was to try to do something about the deficit, which is massive, where the interest payments exceed the amount of money spent on the Department of War. Like basically, if you add up all the money spent on what is now the Department of War and the and intelligence in the U.S., that is smaller than the interest payments on the debt. So that we need to sort of take a close look at spending and make sure that money is being spent in sensible ways and that it is not wasted or spent on unfortunate activities. I got a lot of flack from this obviously. But the people don't understand just how
Good to see
simple
you.
it is for the Doge team to approve payments. If we had literally we just asked to have the contact information of the recipient or some evidence that say money was going to its intended purpose. But over and over there we were told, oh, we need to wire money for some sort of important cause in Africa, and we're like, okay, but the wiring instructions are to Deloitte and Touche in DC, in Washington DC, not to Africa. So we would like to send the money to Africa. Can you please connect us with the recipients so we can send them the money directly? And then we get silence.
We don't need to relitigate Doge. I have no doubt that there's a lot of waste in the US government. I think probably...
Much worse than anyone could possibly imagine.
But the way, I think there is, it is a fair criticism that the way you shut down a whole bunch of programs probably, in fact, certainly caused unnecessary suffering.
No.
No?
No.
You don't buy that at all?
It caused a lot of complaining.
You're watching my interview with Elon Musk. If you want to get early access to other interviews, subscribe to The Economist by clicking the link above. Now, back to the interview. You don't anybody, to put it really crudely and simply, any kid in Africa died because of the suddenness with which...
Zero.
I just don't think... I mean, I've had people
Okay.
reporting in Africa who...
How many NGOs are there that could step in? Because bear in mind, it happened quickly, so there are literally tens of thousands of NGOs.
Not everyone functions as fast as you do. If funding is cut off for antiretrovirals overnight and it just stops, then people will die when they don't have access to them. And it just...
Only if they cannot get funding for that. But the Gates Foundation has $50 billion. What about that? What about any one of a number of organizations? What about
Well, in lots of these countries, USAID...
Mackenzie, whatever her last name is, used to be Bezos, gave $50 billion. What about that?
But, you know, let's be practical. In many of these countries, USAID was the biggest funder. But I don't want to have a...
USAID was a political organization.
May also have been that, but it was the biggest funder of healthcare systems. So I'm very
Biggest
sure that
funder
there was
of regime change.
and there may well be benefits from having changed
Also,
the system.
USAID funding was not stopped; it was moved to the State Department.
Things shut down in Africa.
No, there were claims of this. These claims are false. They're nonsense, and absolute nonsense. But obviously, just for when funding is stopped for fraudulent organizations or for something, do you think they're going to say? Well, please keep funding the fraud, or do you think they're going to come up with a sad story that sounds sympathetic in order to get the funding restored? Obviously, it will be the latter, and that's exactly what they did. But zero died because
Well,
of
that's
Doge.
what I...
Zero. Point is zero.
I think I actually have a lot of sympathy for the change of aid regime that the US... The pace and the suddenness at which it happened was almost like
Totally false.
okay. Well, let's...
And
locked.
but it's fascinating.
Can we talk about Europe? A place that you are as someone who
keep this part.
just a question of when. So I live all the numbers about London is much crime in the UK is not where you think it is. In fact, it's coming down. Because you have so many followers, so many kind of, overrun with terrifying Muslim immigrants. There's there's a sort of civilizational destruction.
Said any of those things. Opinion, but so many Americans I come across, and I have conversations with, and they'll be, and I just had one the other day, along the order, oh, London's such a dangerous place. How can you not know there are sort of grooming gangs everywhere? There's violence everywhere. This is a picture that people get from things that you post or that are posted on X. And for example, you're posting for what was it, 48 Hours of Citizen Vigilante. That film, which paints a dystopian. I watched it. Yes.
It was not fun. I watched it yesterday. It's not a very good movie. But it also paints a dystopian picture of Europe. And it glorifies vigilante violence. It glorifies the murdering of a Muslim immigrant family. I honestly think that it is irresponsible for you to put that up on X.
I think that it's a movie, and it's worth watching.
You're clearly suggesting Europe is a dystopian place, and you...
Yes, I mean, why aren't you doing more to fight censorship in Europe? Why aren't you?
editorials against it. But I
Okay,
don't
great.
think.
Then
And my
that's
point
the
is
sort of thing
that
that I think is bad.
and I think if you, and I agree with you, but I don't think you have to glorify vigilante violence and kind of, post the things that you are doing and paint an entirely inaccurate picture of Europe that
I
you
don't
do.
think it is.
We should do a tour of the UK.
Yes, and one of
Because
Brussels
the UK
too.
has actually been very good at integrating immigrants. The UK is very effective at doing that. There are problems. I'm the first to admit that there are problems.
Yes, there are major problems.
There are problems, but it really is not what you are describing to or suggesting to your 240 million followers it
I
is.
think it
And I
is.
think there's a problem.
No, I think I'm spot on.
We'll have
And that's
to.
why you have freedom of speech, or at least
Well, freedom of
don't
speech
anymore
allows
in the
people to
UK.
say things that are wrong, but your point is not that you're not just saying I have every right to say what I want. You're saying, I am right about Europe, and I really don't think you are.
I think I am.
I think you will find that most people in Europe, or many people in Europe, don't think you're right about it. But let's come to that.
Yes, because the media keeps ignoring reality,
No, I don't think that's true either.
and they're programmed by the TV and conventional media.
And why are you? This is, I guess, even to me sort of a bigger picture question. Why do you focus on this? Why are you interested in it? Because on the one hand, we started this conversation, and you described to me this extraordinarily transformative, amazing, sort of, civilization-changing stuff that's happening in the next 10 years.
Yes.
And yet you're also, an ongoing participant in the worst kind of tribalism, cesspit of social media. Like, how does that fit? Are you, on the one, they're two very different views of the world.
Yeah, I don't think they're inconsistent.
But why do you do the tribalism? I mean, people say that you're a racist. People say that you're, there are all kinds of things said about you, which I'm sure you would disagree with. But I just don't understand, what is the motivation for doing
Yes,
that? Are you
my
fomenting
partner is she's half Indian, and I have 4 children with her. One of them was named after a famous Indian physicist. So I would say I'm not racist, and also if you look at the people that are employed at my companies, we have senior executives who are racist. I don't think there's any racism there.
Are you anti-Muslim?
I'm against having if people are coming to a country with antithetical views, I am against that. I'm against that. I'm against I'm against rape and murder. I'm against the imposition of rules and laws that are contrary to what we've come to accept in the West. It's a crying shame that traditional media like you don't recognize this.
First of all, I think that you hugely exaggerate the challenges that Europe faces. Secondly, in areas I completely agree with you. I think that the constraints on freedom of speech in the UK in certain areas are problematic. What worries me is that the people you are supporting are really quite vile people in some areas. Like some members of the AFD, Alice Weidel, whom I've met, is a perfectly thoughtful person, but in her party are some real neo-Nazis, are some really, really awful people. And your blanket support of this kind of party, with 240 million followers, means that you have a power in Europe that I think perhaps you don't realize the scale of impact you have. But you can
Good. I hope I am having a big
But
impact.
why? Why should you? Why should you be able to shape European politics? You don't even live there.
I think of it as the sort of the West collectively.
Do you see why this makes people think that this man who has all this power, he's the world's richest man, he thinks he has a right to influence our politics? It makes people, it's why, we started this conversation saying superlatives, it's why people loathe you. I mean, some people do loathe you.
Yes, some people do.
But
I
do you
don't care.
understand why? Do you think what you're doing is helpful for Western democracy?
Maybe some people you pointed out, a 250 million people follow me, is that I think a lot more people actually like me than don't. And I think a lot more people hate you and the media more than you realize. Do you realize the media is despised? Do you realize that journalists, the view of journalists is like the favorite view of journalists is like 15%.
I do know that. In the United
Which means
States,
that so the shoe is on the other foot. They hate you. They hate you far more than they hate me.
I think there is certainly a loss of trust in journalism. I think in part there have been mistakes by journalists and journalism. I totally acknowledge that. But I also think that the kind of polarized environment, particularly on social media, fostered by the kinds of things you are pushing on X, actually helps this. It makes it worse.
I don't think so. I think you're the problem, the media. And speaking of loathing, you are loathed far more than I am, and you don't seem to even realize that.
I think very few people know who I am relative to you, so I don't think I play in the same game.
The media collectively. So, I mean, you're hated. Do you even know that? You probably don't.
I like to think that I'm aware of my own personal shortcomings and the Economist's shortcomings and our worldview's shortcomings.
Yeah.
But what we stand for, as you know, is liberal values, traditional, classical liberal values, where we worry about concentrations of power and we believe in the individual and the dignity of the individual and individual freedom.
I agree.
Firmly believe that, and I have long thought that you were a classical liberal. But when I read what you post, classical liberal, J.S. Mill, limited government, individual freedom.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But when I read what you post on your feed, I sometimes wonder whether you really do believe in that.
I literally said, look, I believe in safe cities, secure borders, and sensible spending with respect to government. That doesn't make me right-wing at all, in the least.
Does the US or do European countries score better on those?
The U.S. as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Safe cities, much more dangerous in the US and UK. Sensible spending, bigger deficit here, out of control, you fail to reduce it. Secure borders, now under the Trump administration, I agree with you, before not. But on 2 out of 3, unequivocally, Europe is a better place. Yet you seem to paint a picture of Europe being a hellhole.
I don't think Europe's a hellhole.
Okay, we can agree on something.
When did I ever say that?
Well, the picture you painted
No,
Europe
you're
on X is
you're making up things.
No, I'm not.
You're
You
just
say
literally making it up.
civil war in Britain is inevitable, and then you basically proselytize for this citizen vigilante film, which really does paint it as a hell. It just starts with ominous music, and it says Europe.
Well, there was out of control rape and murder.
It's more dangerous in this country than it is in Europe.
Where there is danger in this country is because we fail to incarcerate repeat violent offenders. And that's, classic sort of Soros DA or judges that fail to incarcerate repeat violent offenders. And if somebody gets arrested 50 times, literally, for violent crimes, and eventually they're going to kill somebody. So you either incarcerate them or people will die.
The prevalence of guns has quite a lot to do with it too. I mean, this is a much more dangerous country. Murder rates are much higher, in large part because there's so many guns.
Well, let me give you an interesting number. There are more people that die in Europe from heat deaths than people that die from gun deaths in America. Why aren't you writing an article about air conditioning?
We've done several on air conditioning, and we had on our cover last week a whole long piece about why.
Pro-air conditioning?
Yeah, very pro air conditioning.
Okay, good.
Very pro.
Good for
You should read us. Absolutely.
Credit's where it's due.
I think you have a view of the Economist that is not entirely accurate. So I will. You come look at England, start reading the Economist, and I will, stand corrected on my criticism of you in this area.
There are many parts of Britain and Europe which are not safe, you can't just walk around.
But there are far more in this country. Far more.
No, I don't think so.
Right, let's go and get my fact checkers to check that.
Yeah, I don't think that's true.
Let's move on from this because I think I've got a sense of why you're doing what you're doing.
The point is not that the question is not is America perfect. The question is does Europe have a serious and growing problem?
The question
Absolutely,
is
it has a
which
serious
is
and
more
growing problem.
dangerous. That's where we started this.
Europe has a serious and growing problem. I'm not going to say that the United States has no problems. Of course it does. But you know, we should all try to address these issues.
We can agree on that. We should all try to address the problems. My point was simply that I think you exaggerate the scale of Europe's problem. And that
I think people are asleep at the switch and do not realize the magnitude of the issue.
I also think that your interventions, however well-intentioned they may be, risk making Europe's problem a lot worse.
How?
Because you are putting your support behind people who are proto-authoritarians, who are not trying simply to, make sure there is better integration of Muslims or to secure the borders, but who have very clear fascist tendencies, and you will
I
cause
think you're
huge
just completely
divisions
making
within
things up.
Europe.
I think what you're saying is total fiction, and really, I'm simply saying that that Europe has to have secure borders,
On that we
and
agree
should
on.
not let in
That's-
vast numbers of people with views that are antithetical to the accepted views in Europe, and where there will not be some level of safe cultural integration. This is simply common sense.
If all you are saying is Europe should have secure borders, I completely agree with you. Then I have misunderstood what your interventions have been on social media, because that is not what the view I have, or not what I would conclude having seen the people you are supporting and the things you're doing. But if that's your goal, I share your goal that Europe should have secure borders.
Yes.
That's perfectly agreeable. That gets me to a question.
And let me explain what the fundamental forcing function here is for why the borders are not secure, which is when you have a welfare state that provides substantial benefits to anyone who comes there, you create a very powerful economic forcing function for anyone who is below that standard of living to come to Europe. It is an obvious, powerful driving force, and people will come there if their standard of living is, from what they get in Europe, is above where they are elsewhere in the world. It's very basic.
I completely agree with that.
Yes.
I don't
It's a
disagree.
very basic incentive structure.
Economic conditions, economic influences determine a lot of migration. I think asylum is a separate issue, but I think you're absolutely right. There are pressures for migration. However, there are other things that you haven't focused on, which is migration brings a lot of benefits, and it also particularly does so in a continent like Europe, which is a rapidly aging continent. So we can agree that completely uncontrolled borders are a bad idea, but I think Europe benefits from having immigration, controlled immigration. It brings
Yes, I'm in favor of immigration. Obviously, I'd be hypocritical if I wasn't, since I'm an immigrant to the United States. I'm in favor of immigration if the person immigrating is going to be a productive member of society, if they're going to be honest, and if they're not going to mistreat people in that country they're going to.
I can agree on all of those,
Yes.
but I think Europe does better on that than you give it credit for. That's, I think, where we disagree. But let's move on. Tell me, what do you think people get most wrong about you?
Well, I mean, you've just got a whole bunch of things wrong about me. Pretty much everything in the last, just rewind the last 20 minutes, still wrong.
So I got wrong your
Well, let's not be repetitive.
okay. So that political side of you people get most wrong.
Yeah, my political views are centrist. They're not far right, and practically calling it far right, I think, is an insult to history, an insult to many peoples, and it is an outrageous falsehood. It's completely absurd. I literally have stated my position, which is that, and I've been very clear about this, which is that there need to be secure borders. That if there's an influx of immigrants, they need to be people who will agree that with Western ideals, with Western values. And if don't, and if there's a long-term growth of people who do not, or in some cases are adamantly opposed to Western values, you are setting yourself up for civil war. This is obvious. A child can see this. But this is not a right review. I'm simply stating reality.
Well, I think we can both agree that evidence will be able to decide which of us is more or
Yes.
less right. And we will find evidence for both of our views in different parts of Europe. The question
Yes.
is what the overall
I'm very
is.
good at predicting the future. I'm not perfect, but I'm very good at predicting the future. My batting average is very high for a human. But this does have somewhat of a Cassandra effect, where people don't believe that what I'm saying is likely to be true, because I can see into the future with a higher not perfectly, but with a higher probability of success than most people. So, and including things that people believe to be, in some cases, counterintuitive. Again, I'm not saying I'm always right. I certainly am not. But my batting average is very good. But this does have, like I said, a Cassandra effect where people don't realize that what I'm saying will come to pass. Maybe not exactly in the timing that I thought, but it will come to pass. History will write the verdict. But I think you will see that very little of what I've said is inaccurate, and a supermajority of what I've said is very accurate and will come to pass, unless there's some change in direction.
Do you have higher confidence level in your expectations of the future for AI, the first part of our conversation, or the latter part, the political part?
AI is visual superintelligence. It's called the singularity, like a black hole, because you don't know what's going to happen after that. And it sort of sucks in everything. So I think really, in terms of the really big macro effects here, AI and robots will really dominate everything. So on a time scale that is less than 10 years.
Which probably renders this other stuff that we've been talking about less important and less relevant.
The AI robotics revolution will happen sooner. It'll happen sooner than Civil War in Britain. I would say Civil War in Britain is probably 20 years away, and the AI robot singularity is 10 years away.
Well, hopefully these benign, all-powerful AIs will prevent such outcomes.
They probably will.
Elon, I don't agree with everything you say, but it's always absolutely fascinating to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. I'm not boring.
You're definitely not boring.
The scary open secret in the AI industry right now is that it's possible that we'll end up essentially creating a new species that ends up ruling the world with a 70% chance that this goes horribly wrong like humans. That's one possibility. There's many more.
It's quite chilling what you're saying.
Yeah, gets me down sometimes. I basically told my wife, like, let's not have any more kids. It's too uncertain. I don't think they'll ever go to workplace. Everybody should be afraid that their jobs are going to be lost. And I know this because I went to OpenAI in 2022. What I did there was forecasting as to what the next couple of years might look like. And unfortunately, most of the world is kind of asleep at the wheel and doesn't really realize what's going on with AI. So I resigned.
I read it somewhere that you lost $2 million for not signing an anti-disparagement clause, meaning you couldn't criticize the company.
Yes, for reasons I'm happy to get into. But the main thing I've learned is when I go talk to people at Anthropic and OpenAI about forecasting, they're like, it's not going to take that long. You need to shorten them again. Get them back to 2027 or 2028 because these powerful CEOs, Ario or Sam or Elon, are racing each other to be in control of the most powerful AIs and are literally afraid that if the other guy gets there first, he might become dictator. I mean, Anthropic is on track to be the entire economy by 2030, but none of these people should be trusted with that much power. So this is the most important thing happening in our lifetimes, probably in all of history, in fact, and it's very important that it go well. So I think that there's a lot we can do to like steer things in a better direction. There's loads of benefits that we could get from AI if we do it right, and if we do solve the problems, then things could be absolutely amazing for everyone.
Well, this report here in 2021, it was remarkably accurate, and then you just published this one.
Yeah, so this is our new scenario.
So let's go through these slowly one at a time.
I would be incredibly happy if all my predictions turn out to be wrong.
This is super interesting to me. My team gave me this report to show me how many of you that watch this show subscribe, and some of you have told us, according to this, that you are unsubscribed from the channel randomly. So in favour to ask all of you, please could you check right now if you've hit the subscribe button, if you are a regular viewer of the show and you like what we do here. We're approaching quite a significant landmark on this show in terms of a subscriber number. So if there was one simple free thing that you could do to help us, my team, everyone here, to keep this show free, to keep it improving year over year and week over week, it is just to hit that subscribe button and to double check if you've hit it. Only thing I'll ever ask of you. Do we have a deal? If you do it, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make sure every single week, every single month, we fight harder and harder and harder and harder to bring you the guests and conversations that you want to hear. I've stayed true to that promise since the very beginning of the Diary of a CEO, and I will not let you down. Please help us. Really appreciate it. Let's get on with the show. Daniel Cocatello. At the very heart of what you do, what is your mission and why?
So what would you do if you thought that superintelligence was coming in a few years?
I guess it depends what the consequences were.
Well, let's talk about it. So superintelligence, AIs that are better than the best humans at everything, while also being faster and cheaper, also able to operate robots that can do everything in the physical world that humans can do, but better, faster, and cheaper. If that really is coming in a few years, then we need to prepare, and we need to think about how to make it go well instead of poorly. So that's sort of my answer. I'm doing that to the best of my ability.
So you believe it's coming in a few years?
Yes.
How could you be so sure?
I spend a lot of time trying to forecast this sort of thing. My sort of median estimate, 50% chance, is currently in 2029, maybe it'll slip to 2028. It's possible that it'll take significantly longer, like maybe 10 years or something like that. But, for reasons I'm not going to get into, it seems to me like it's probably happening by the end of the decade. What's less important is the sense of how close we are. What's more important is the pace of the trends. Anthropic, this time last year, was making something like $1 billion a year, and now they're making something like $60 billion a year. So that's 60x growth in 1 year, which is extremely impressive even for very small startups, but for a company of their size, it might be the fastest growth in history. We expect that rate of growth to slow down, but even if it slows down quite a lot, they're still on track to be, the entire economy by 2030 or so.
Why should the average person care?
High level thing is absolutely everything's going to change for the whole world, and including therefore for them and their families. Could change for the better, could change for the worse, depending on the details of how it's done. So for example, everyone could die. This is the classic loss of control scenario, or one version of it. If we do build these superintelligences and we use them to automate all the jobs, and we put them in the military, and we have them giving advice to politicians and so forth, they will eventually have accumulated enough real-world power that they don't need humans anymore. And they're smarter than us, they're more strategic, etc. At that point, we sort of have to hope that they are virtuous, that they have the goals that we wanted them to have, the values that we wanted them to have, etc. And the sort of scary open secret in the AI industry right now is that that is kind of just a hope. It's not something that we can be at all confident in, and in fact there's lots of evidence and arguments that we're not on track to achieve that. So there's lots of reasons, like current AIs, for example, will often lie to people, or they will you tell them to do something and they go do something else and then pretend that they did it, right? So it's an inherently difficult problem to make something that's super intelligent and also has the values and virtues that you want it to have, and it doesn't seem like we're on track to solve that problem. Also, it seems like the sort of problem that you could think you've solved when you haven't actually solved it, right? That's a big reason why this is scary. So for all those reasons, it's possible that we'll end up essentially creating a new species that ends up ruling the world instead of us, and then maybe we go the way of other extinct species in the past that were outcompeted by humans. That's one possibility. There's many more. even if you're not worried about that, and you think that the AIs will be totally controlled, there's the question of who controls the AIs, right? When there's a couple corporations that have made these super intelligences and are using them to automate all the jobs, well, that's a lot of power, you know? It's a lot of money, it's a lot of political power. They'll have the best strategists, the best advisors, you know, they'll think faster. Militarily, the countries that has these AIs will be able to absolutely wipe the floor with all the other countries. The AIs themselves, it's kind of a single point of failure, like central control system where, you know, the CEO of Anthropic, Dario, he coined this phrase, the country of geniuses in the data center. That was his phrase to describe what they're trying to build, you know? I think that's a little bit misleading. I think it would be more accurate to describe it as army of geniuses in the data center, because it's not like it's a bunch of diverse different AIs, you know, living in their different parts of the data center. They're all copies of the same big model, and they're owned by the company, and so they all follow the orders given by the company, right? People should be asking questions of like, who controls this army or these armies, and what are they going to be doing with them? I think that we could very easily end up in a sort of a situation where some tiny group of people are essentially oligarchs or dictators. And ironically, both of these risks, the loss of control and the concentration of power, are things that people in the industry have been thinking about for decades. Even before the AI industry existed, you know, people thinking about AI were talking and writing about these things. And then part of the founding narrative, the founding myth of DeepMind and OpenAI and Anthropic is these problems are real, so we need to get there first so that we can handle it responsibly. Those are, I think, the big two reasons, but then I can go on. There's lots more reasons as well. So one thing is, you know, World War III, geopolitical conflict. If AI does in fact get incredibly powerful, that's going to change the balance of power between nations. That's going to disrupt a lot of things. That puts us at increased risk of crisis more generally, right? Another one, what about those jobs? You're going to lose your taxi job, but not just the taxi job, for everybody, pretty much. There might be a few exceptions, like people whose jobs, for legal reasons, are only allowed to be done by humans, but for the most part, everybody should be afraid that their jobs are going to be lost, even if we manage to avoid all the other problems, right?
This narrative has started to emerge, and I've had several interviews on this show where I've interviewed people who are very, very scared and anxious about AI, and these are people that have worked in the industry for sometimes decades.
Yeah.
The counter-narrative coming over the hill is that this is doomerism, that these people are, for whatever reason, just trying to scare people, and that they don't really understand what they're talking about. How do you respond to that sort of counter-narrative? And you must have seen this emerging yourself, especially from people who stand to benefit, dare I say.
Yeah, exactly. This counter-narrative is fairly recent, and it's been pushed by the people who stand to benefit from it, and it's not true. Like, these concerns have been around for decades, since before the AI industry existed. They're actually pretty reasonable concerns. Like, if you take the companies at their word and imagine that they are in fact going to build superintelligence, well, it raises a lot of questions, like who's going to control it? Will anybody control it? What about the jobs? You know, like these are just kind of obvious implications to be thinking about and worrying about.
Who are you and what's your story?
My name is Daniel Cocotello. I currently run the AI Futures Project, which is a small nonprofit that mostly focuses on forecasting the future of AI. Before that, I worked at OpenAI.
AI forecasting?
Yeah, so think about how, like, you know, industry analysts who work for hedge funds and stuff will make these forecasts of, like, here's, you know, how many cars Tesla will be selling 5 years from now, or like, here's what the price of electricity will be in 2 years, right? That's forecasting. I was doing that, but specifically focused on AI. The reason I was doing it is because it's incredibly important to see where this is all headed.
Why did you go to OpenAI? What did you do there? What did you observe while you were there? And how did it change your perspective on the future of AI, but also, I guess, OpenAI as a company? And for anybody that doesn't know, OpenAI are the company that produced ChatGPT.
Yeah, so I went to OpenAI in 2022. A large part of what I did there was more forecasting. AI 2027 is a scenario that you may have heard of. I did like smaller, you know, lower effort versions of them internally for just internal circulation of like, here's some guesses as to what the next couple of years might look like. I also worked on evaluations for dangerous capabilities. So, you know, trying to measure the AI's cyber abilities or persuasion abilities or situational awareness. And I also briefly was on a capabilities team doing reinforcement learning to create agents. AI is in fact getting a lot better, and I can say more about why. Scaling laws, deep neural nets, became a bit more disillusioned with the AI industry. So OpenAI, Anthropic, and DeepMind all had these sort of founding narratives of like, yes, these risks are real, but we've thought about them and we're going to try to handle them responsibly, and that's why it's important for us to keep doing what we're doing. And I increasingly came to think that these were rationalizations to justify what they were doing, rather than sort of like deeply guiding their actual behavior, and that when push comes to shove, they'll follow their incentives rather than do what's actually good.
So you're inside OpenAI at the time, and you start to believe that they're following commercial incentives versus the, I guess, social or societal incentives that they founded themselves on.
Sort of. I mean, I wouldn't actually describe it as commercial incentives. I think I would describe it as power-seeking incentives. So, like, it's true that the companies care a lot about making a lot of money, but especially at the very top of these companies, like the leaders, they understand that this is about more than just money. You know, there are these emails that came up in, the lawsuit between Musk and OpenAI. A bunch of emails were surfaced in that lawsuit, which you can go read. And in some of them, the founders of OpenAI were talking back in like 2017 about how the reason why we made OpenAI was because we were worried that Demis Hassabis at Google was going to become dictator with AGI. Even back then, this is obviously about more than just money. Like these powerful CEOs are literally afraid that if the other guy gets there first, he might become dictator. And they don't trust each other, and so that's why they are racing as hard as they can so that they're the ones who get there first, so to speak.
Have you met Sam Altman?
Yeah.
And did that shape your opinion of his incentives, or why he's doing what he's doing? Because there's a lot, speculated about what his incentives are. I mean, his most recent narrative says for the good of humanity. I think that's what.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing I've learned is don't pay attention to the narratives. What they say to one person is just different from what they can say to some other person at the same time, and what they say in public is a third thing entirely. I think you should judge people by their actions, not by their words.
And why are you no longer at OpenAI?
Largely for the reason that I mentioned. So I became gradually disillusioned with how the company was going to behave. For example, when I first joined in 2022, at least the people I talked to, my colleagues at the company, there was this general sense of like, of course, we wouldn't actually just build super intelligence as soon as possible. Once we started getting really close, like once we started getting to AIs that could maybe automate the AI research process, we would pause and figure out how to make it safe. That's because we're the good guys, and that's obviously the safe thing you should do rather than just going full speed ahead. But we're worried about other people who might not pause, our competitors, Google, for example. And so that's why we need to be in the lead, so that we have that room to do the safe stuff, right? That was sort of like a thing that seems like maybe like the median position or something among the colleagues I talked to when I was there when I started, including people like Sam, including the leadership. And then by the time I left, I was like, oh man, they're really not going to do that, are they? Like they've sort of, partly because this has become more politicized and they've become bigger and been under more scrutiny, people have started asking, like, why are you doing this in the first place if it's so risky? And so they've pivoted their narrative to being more like, actually, it's not that risky, And so, yeah, I mean, it seems like they're just going to keep going roughly as fast as they can and hope that they can figure it out along the way.
How did your time at OpenAI come to an end?
I resigned in 2024, had a nice goodbye party.
What were the reasons you gave for quitting OpenAI?
I thought that we were rationalizing too much and that we need to think more about what would actually be good for the world. I wanted more freedom to publish. So at OpenAI, as it became a bigger company, it became more of a normal tech company with incentives and a PR department and things like that. And so it started becoming more difficult to publish the sort of research that I was doing. For example, those scenarios that I mentioned, couldn't publish those, right? They're just for internal use. I thought that was a shame because right now most of the world is kind of asleep at the wheel and doesn't really realize what's going on with AI and doesn't really realize what's coming in the pipeline a couple years from now. And the companies aren't really incentivized to tell people that much about it. I mean, they say some vague stuff in a sort of hypey way, but they didn't want me to publish the scenario, for example, laying out like here's how things might actually look.
I'm super curious as to what it's like being in a company like that when ChatGPT 3 is released. You were there at that time, right? Which was a moment where I think the whole world stood up and realized that this technology was powerful.
Yeah.
And the conversation really began from a society level. Company starts growing super quickly, quicker than I think anybody could ever have imagined. And what was it like inside there? What did you see change over that period of time?
I remember one all-hands meeting where Ilya said something like...
Ilya being...
Ilya Setskover, who was head of research at that time. He said something like, okay, now the world is starting to pay attention. Each of you is going to be the most popular person at every party for the next year. Don't let it get to your head. Focus on the mission. Got to build AGI. The company grew a lot. It already wasn't really feeling like a nonprofit when I joined, but it definitely didn't feel like a nonprofit by the time I left. Lots of new people came in. Ironically, the amount of conversation about superintelligence and the implications of superintelligence arguably sort of went down over time due to this growth, right? So because the company would double and double again and double again, all these new people were coming in from other parts of the tech industry who hadn't really been thinking about these things and were attracted by the high salaries.
You lost $2 million for not signing an anti-disparagement clause, which would mean you couldn't criticize the company.
Yes. Well, so I got to keep the money.
Oh, you got to keep
So
the money.
what happened was, after I had left, said my goodbyes, etc., I got the exit paperwork, and it included this clause that said you basically have to agree not to criticize the company again. And also a clause saying you can't tell anyone about this. And so I thought that was kind of rich coming from a nonprofit that's supposed to be, for the benefit of all humanity. So I didn't sign it. And if you don't sign, you don't get to keep your equity. So your compensation, what they pay you is a bunch of money and then also a bunch of stock, basically. But then they had this stuff in the contract. They get to yank back your stock if you don't sign this thing. And my wife and I, were upset about this. We talked about it for a month or two, consulted some lawyers, and then ultimately decided to just refuse to sign.
Which would mean you would have lost $2 million.
That's right. Which was 80% of our net worth at the time. Fortunately, it didn't go the way we expected. It blew up, basically, on the internet. When people heard that we had done this and then we said no, it became this huge scandal. Employees at the company started asking questions in Slack and asking leadership wait, what? Why are you going to take away our equity? What is this? Because a lot of people hadn't really noticed this before. It had been whispered about, but it hadn't been sort of a thing that most employees knew about. And so they backtracked and they said, never mind, we'll change the paperwork, you keep the equity, it's fine.
And Sam Altman came out and said he was embarrassed that he didn't realize this was going.
Yeah, he had no idea, apparently.
You don't believe him?
No, I think he probably knew. And if he didn't know, then people close to him probably did, such as his head lawyer.
Why did you decide not to take the $2 million?
I mean,
most people would have, I think.
it's true, most people would have and most people did. And, money is nice, but it's not the only thing, Sometimes it's good to take a stand on principle. I keep mentioning superintelligence. Perhaps I should say more about the sequence of events that the companies are planning to do. So right now, they're focusing on automating coding. They're taking their AIs, they're making them bigger, they're training them for longer, and they're especially focusing the training on getting them to be good at autonomously writing and editing code, because that will help the companies go faster, right? If they can automate the code, then they can do their own work better and faster and accelerate progress. The next step, which they've already begun, is to look at the rest of the research process as well, coming up with ideas, analyzing experiments, communicating those results. All the other parts of the research process, they're trying to figure out how to train AIs to be good at those as well, so that they can have AIs do the entire thing autonomously.
When you say do the entire thing, what do you mean, do the entire thing?
So Anthropic and OpenAI in particular are trying to automate themselves. They're trying to make it the case that they don't really need human employees anymore. They just have a giant army of AIs that's churning away, doing all this autonomous research to make better AIs, to train the new AIs, put them in charge, so they can make even better AIs and so forth. And of course, not all just happening internally, but also interfacing with the world, right? Going out and talking to people, collecting the data, setting up the training environments, doing the business deals, and so forth. They're trying to automate all of that. The reason why they're doing this is because they're trying to get to a position where they have AIs that are superhuman at everything, super intelligence, and they're trying to get there before their competitors do. Needless to say, this is incredibly dangerous, I would say, you know? And in addition to being dangerous, it's a power grab, right? Like if they actually succeed at this, then they'll be sitting on top of this army of superhuman AIs that will give them immense leverage over all sorts of other actors in the economy, insofar as they can work out something with the presidents and integrate it into the military or whatever. Then that would give the U.S. immense hard power over all other countries, right? Obviously, nobody knows exactly when this is happening, but a very disquieting thing has happened over the last year to me, which is that when we published AI 2027, people were generally of the opinion that my timelines were too short, and that like probably it would take more than 2027 until we got to this sort of events that I was just mentioning. Recursive self-improvement, AIs automating the whole research process, superintelligence. These types of milestones, they happen in 2027 in AI 2027.
Which is this research paper you published.
That's right. It's a scenario forecast that sort of lays out like month by month a possible future trajectory. There was sort of like, at the time that we started writing, it was my best guess as to what would actually happen. Obviously, there's also uncertainty, but I thought it's valuable to make a concrete guess just to sort of see what it might look like. And at the time we were writing this, a lot of my friends in the AI industry and in nonprofits and so forth that work on AI, a lot of people were saying like, yeah, that stuff's going to happen, but like it'll probably take a couple years longer than you think. And now it's more 50-50, especially when I go talk to people at Anthropic and OpenAI. They're often like, yeah, no, 2027, that's basically what's going to happen. Just like you wrote. Why did you update your timelines? Oh yeah, context for this is after writing AI 2027, I shifted my timelines to be a little bit more conservative. So at the time that we published, my 50% mark was in 2028, not in 2027. And then after we published, progress just seemed like it was going a bit slower, and so I updated to 2030, which is still could happen sooner, could happen later, 2030. But now, when I talk to people in the companies, they're like, it's not going to take that long. They're like, oh, you need to shorten them again. Like, get them back to 2027 or 2028, So that's a bit disquieting. Again, don't know how long it's going to take, but this is the stated plans of the AI companies is to do this incredibly dangerous thing, and they think that they're just a few years away.
So you wrote this report here, what 2026 looks like, and you wrote this in 2021, and it was remarkably accurate, helped make a name for yourself amongst everybody in AI. And which one was it that JD Vance, the vice president, read? I think it was this one, wasn't it? Yeah, this one. And then you published this one, AI 2027, and this was published, I believe, in 2025?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. What were you forecasting in here? What are the key things that you said in here for people that haven't read it?
The high-level version of it is they automate the coding, then they automate the rest of the research process, then pace of progress accelerates dramatically, they get to superintelligence, they're working with the government, specifically the president, the executive branch naturally wants to control this technology and otherwise wants to use it to beat China and integrate it into military and so forth. By this point, it's sort of doing basically all the work itself. I mean, it's super intelligent, so it's coming up with all these great ideas for how to integrate itself into everything, all these new technologies it's invented and so forth. And because of the race dynamics and because of the profit motive, they end up deploying it everywhere. And it builds robot factories, they build more robots, they build more robot factories, etc. Transforms the world entirely. And then at some point it has enough power, it meaning the AIs, have enough power that they don't have to pretend to be aligned anymore, right? Then they stop listening to orders. That's the race ending of AI 2027. We also wrote a sort of different branch, which is the slowdown ending, which was intended to sort of illustrate the concentration of power issues that I mentioned previously. So what if, hypothetically, the alignment issues get sorted out sufficiently quickly? Like, what if it turns out that, like, it's not too hard. With 2 months of slowdown, we can figure out how to make the AIs robustly do what we want and have the values that we want them to have. So that's one possible branch. And in that branch, it looks pretty similar. They take the jobs, beat China, etc. But instead of the AIs ultimately killing everyone, they create this sort of amazing utopia. But the amazing utopia is whatever the people who control the AIs wanted it to be, right? And so that would be a very small group of people, the president, some CEOs, etc.
There should be a button just down below here, and if it says subscribed, you're already subscribed. If it says subscriber, that means you're not yet. And if you're not subscribed, please can you do us a favour and hit that button. It helps the show more than you know, and according to the algorithm, you're someone that watches our show, but you haven't hit that button. Thank you so much.
Is there any possibility, do you think, that we never get to this thing called AGI? And how do we distinguish AGI from this term superintelligence? What's the difference?
Yeah, so the difference is that AGI is a more vague and weak term.
Okay.
So superintelligence is a bit more precisely defined. It's better than the best humans at everything, faster and cheaper. AGI is more like, it stands for artificial general intelligence, which means AIs that can do things in general rather than like some specific task.
Yeah.
And so arguably, we've already achieved AGI, right? If you use Claude Code or something like that, it's like it can do a lot of stuff. It's almost kind of like a little employee that you can like have go do stuff. So it is quite general. It's not maximally general though. It can't do everything. Whereas superintelligence by definition can do all the things that a human can do but better.
And how does this sort of overlap with robotics? Because obviously we're seeing this huge robotics boom at the moment. There are some real world things that humans can still do because these AIs are still stuck in my computer.
The way that people talk about this is that they basically just say we've achieved superintelligence for cognitive tasks. Then you can talk about like full superintelligence that can do the physical stuff.
And are we going to get there? Are we going to get there with both?
I think so. I mean, again, this is not something that we can be certain about. You asked, like, is it possible we'll never get there? Yes, it's possible we'll never get there. I don't think it's likely, though. I think that there's nothing sort of, like, magical about the human brain. It's, you know, it's just a bunch of neurons. It is possible for a digital system to do similar functions in the same way that, like, you know, a plane can fly, just like a bird. Not in the same way as a bird, necessarily. It doesn't have... It's not flying in the same way that a bird flies, but it flies, you know? So it does seem like, yeah, like, seems possible.
You've written all these, you know, these research reports. You're working on another one that will be released likely on the 9th of July. You have worked inside OpenAI. You then quit OpenAI because you were concerned about what was going on there and about the future of the industry. You know more than I do. Are you optimistic about the future or pessimistic? Are we heading to a bad place if things don't change based on everything that you know?
I think we are headed to a bad place if things don't change. I'm not confident in that. I would say something like 70%. It's very, very hard to predict, of course. But yeah, it seems like the current default path is heading towards a very, very scary place.
How do you contend with that personally and emotionally?
It's rough. I mean, I think it's the sort of thing that, like, gets me down on a regular basis, but also I've been dealing with this for so many years now that I've sort of gotten used to it. Does that make sense? I'll put it this way. I would be incredibly happy if all my predictions turn out to be wrong and AI hits the wall, for example.
It gets you down on a regular basis.
I used to be known as a pretty chipper and optimistic person, but in 2020, my AI timelines predictions started collapsing due to GPT-3 and the scaling laws papers and the bioanchors report, which I can talk about if you're interested. Basically, some events happened in 2020 that convinced me that actually this stuff was like quite plausible coming by the end of the decade. And humanity is very obviously not ready for this, you know, in a whole bunch of different ways. And so that's obviously very scary.
And that's the extremely scary world because of all the things you've said, but again, because of this recursive self-improvement where AIs can train themselves. And at such a point, we're starting to lose hold of what's going on here.
I mean, the AIs are already training themselves, to be clear. It's more like closing the entire research lab. Right?
Okay, so doing everything.
Yeah, like right now, a lot of the training data is generated by AIs. A lot of the reinforcement, like the grading that happens, doling out of positive and negative reinforcement, is itself done by AIs.
Can you explain that in layman's terms?
Yeah, so an important thing for everybody to understand is that modern AI systems are not software in the normal sense. I mean, they are technically software, but they're not lines of code. You know, it's not like some engineers at Anthropic went and wrote lines of code that basically says, like, you know, when the user asks for this type of thing, then go do this type of thing for this many steps or whatever. There's nothing like that. Instead, it's a neural net, you know?
What's that?
Well, think about how the brain is a bunch of neurons connected to each other
Yeah.
that are firing signals back and forth. The brain learns over time. The types of patterns of firing that caused success that caused a dopamine rush or various other types of feedback get reinforced and fire more often, and the types of patterns that caused failure, like touching a hot stove, get anti-reinforced, get destroyed, so that they fire less often. And as a result of all of that, you, over the course of years, learn to act in the world, and you learn all sorts of skills, and you learn world models, you learn like beliefs about the world, and you can sort of like mentally simulate how it's going and stuff like that. So artificial neural nets are like that, except artificial. So it starts off as a giant tangled spaghetti mess of randomly generated artificial connections called parameters. These days, they might be something like 10 trillion parameters in the biggest AIs. So it starts off randomly generated. So it's, of course, completely useless. Like, if you give it some input, it'll just produce gibberish as an output. But then they train it. And they start with pre-training, which is where you give it a bunch of internet text, and you show it the first piece of text, and you put that in as the input, and then it gives a gibberish output, and then you positively or negatively reinforce it based on how accurate that output was at predicting the next piece of text. So it's basically playing this game of like predict the next word.
Isn't that how it happens with babies? I think I had a neuroscientist tell me that babies have more neural connections than adults, and yeah, it says toddlers have twice as many neural connections as adults, and I guess they whittle down through reinforcement.
Yep.
We have more pathways when we're younger, and just like the process of training an AI, we're trained down to like remove the ones that aren't useful and build up on the ones that are.
Yeah, it's both pruning and strengthening.
Okay.
And it seems like in humans it's actually more pruning than strengthening, but it's both. And in AI it's the same thing, it's both. So the first portion of training is where they train the AI to predict text, which is kind of like training it to read. And a similar thing does happen in humans. So basically, the random tangle gradually takes shape and gradually sort of coalesces into more useful circuitry that has stored lots of facts about the world and has stored lots of skills for how to, process information and transform it and then produce predictions. That's just the first step. After they do the pre-training, then they try to teach it more useful skills besides just predicting text. And so, by the end of the process, they've thrown lots of coding problems at it. And they've said, like, here's a coding problem, go. Here's a coding problem, here's an environment, you have access to this virtual computer, here's like the code base you're working with, you can write code, you can edit the code, you can run the code, you can read it, you can use the internet, go. And it does that for a while, and then based on how successful it is, reinforcement happens, and they have thousands, maybe millions of examples of coding problems like that they train it on. And that's why they're so good at coding now.
So what does superintelligence look like in this regard? Is it just more of these connections, and how would they get more connections? Can you explain that to me like I'm...
So there's different AI models, right? So there's like GPT-3 and GPT-4 and GPT-4.5 and GPT-5 and GPT-5.5 and 5.6, right? Sometimes they're just the same previous model but with extra training. Sometimes they're a whole new model that's been trained from scratch, including starting the whole pre-training process again. Over the last couple of years, they've done several new rounds of starting over from scratch. And typically when they start over from scratch, they make the whole thing bigger, the artificial brain much bigger.
Okay.
Right now they're at something like 10 trillion parameters. Back in 2020, it was more like 175 billion. So we've grown like 2 orders of magnitude in 6 years.
2 orders of magnitude?
Yeah, like 2 10x's, so 100x, right? So that process is continuing. They're also improving the algorithms themselves. So they're not literally just the same type of AI but bigger. They've also come up with all sorts of ideas for how to change the structure of the connections in the neurons and so forth, and change the like reinforcement algorithms that they're using, and to change the training data that they're training on. All sorts of tweaks that have made this whole thing more efficient.
We're literally building a brain.
Basically, yeah. As they make more brains, they're getting better at they're making them bigger and making them more efficient and so forth.
And it's literally modeled on the brain, like the way it works, right?
It's certainly heavily inspired by the brain, but I shouldn't overstate the analogy. Like, there's lots of differences too. So for example, the transformer architecture, which is the architecture that they use for these LLMs, is not really recurrent. So the information sort of flows one way rather than allowing all these sort of little loops on the inside. Also, the backpropagation algorithm is different from the sort of learning that naturally happens. in human brains. So there are some differences, but yes, like broadly speaking, we are sort of making artificial brains. It's kind of like for brains what like a plane is for a bird.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. That analogy helped me think through a bunch of questions people often ask about AI when they said, can it be creative? But actually that analogy kind of helps me understand that actually that maybe that's not the question. It's, can it produce something that you would consider to be creative? Because creativity, people think of it as like a process, but actually it's judged based on the output, isn't it?
I mean, you can get philosophical about like, is it truly creativity that they have? But you can also be like, well, I mean, just look at all the stuff they're accomplishing, you know? And it seems like they're going to be accomplishing a lot more in the near future.
Yeah, I do. I asked the question about how this weighs on you personally because I can sense that you're actually personally bothered.
I mean, I think the situation is crazy. Like, first of all, it's very exciting. Like, AI is really fascinating and interesting stuff. I've been following the field for more than a decade now. I've been part of it for some years. And it's really cool, really interesting. And it's really fun to think about what's going on inside these artificial brains and why they are the way that they are. And it's really cool to see all the applications of this technology out in the world. But it really seems like we're on a pretty scary path. And the more you think about it, the more worried you get. And, you know, in stories, it always ends well, but this is real life. And I think we have to sort of stare reality in the face and tell it and realize that like it might not actually end well, you know?
Were there any recent, dare I say, I was going to say eureka moments, but paradigm shifting moments where even your own sort of mental model of what's going on here and how this is going to look were changed for better or for worse?
For better or for worse, and probably for worse, things are kind of on track for AI 2027. There are a few things that have been different, not exactly like paradigm shift differences, but like there have been some differences from what we expected at the time we wrote this. So the government has actually got involved faster than we expected and has been more aggressive than we expected. So the export controls on Mythos being the biggest example, and also threatening Anthropic with being destroyed by the Defense Production Act. Another thing that's been surprising to us is that Anthropic in particular has gone from second place to first place in the sort of, in the race, basically.
Why do you think that happened? Because it seemed like ChatGPT were out front and clear as it relates to OpenAI were out front and clear, but suddenly Anthropic have lapped them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they have probably higher talent density and better strategy, but not by a lot, but enough to make a difference.
Why do you think they have more talent?
Well, they don't have more compute. Like, what are the inputs, right? Like, they're in the lead now. They used to be behind. What are the possible explanations for this? Well, it could have been that they had more resources, like more compute, more money. But that's not true. They have less resources and less money, right? So then, I guess talent is the next best alternative. You could maybe say strategy, some combination of those things, yeah. Something that wasn't just like the amount of resources they had.
Just like John Jones, where marginal improvements in your cognitive performance can have a massive impact. Sometimes I podcast for 10 hours a day. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been in filming for a TV show, and then I have like 1 or 2 days off to get all of my work done, which means there's lots of cognitive load. Able to think on things, able to work out better, and I'm fueled by the reason I became a co-owner of this company and the reason why they now are a sponsor of this podcast is because I remember one of my team members called Christiana, she tried it once and came up to my desk and she goes, "This is the best product ever made." And I think in part that's because she really cares about those cognitive benefits, as I do, as John Jones does. And I think most of our listeners probably will. All you have to do is go to ketone.com
burdened.
What about jobs?
I think I'm excited to some new things. Jobs, there are worse things. It's kind of like, but yes, like once, just think about it. If the companies do manage to build super intelligence, then by definition, they're going to be able to take almost all the jobs or all the jobs, right? Because it's better, faster, cheaper than the best humans.
I'm trying to think about when we can start to see jobs in the economy.
We're already starting to see it, but they're you can imagine a world where it's gradual, and this is maybe how it is in a lot of science fiction, is, the AIs gradually get better at a bunch of things. But what's different about this is the companies converged on this strategy. And so, if they're allowed to continue with this strategy, we're not going to see, the taxis and like the plumber robots and the lawyer AIs. We're not going to see that sort of like broad diffusion of AI into the economy happening. They're focused on automating themselves, on doing their own research. And and the benefits right? So and that means that like the AIs will be vastly superhuman at AI research, and probably also lots of other things.
Yes.
Just as, if you're wondering what this looks like, well, we wrote about what it looks like. It's sort of like this wave smashing through the economy after they do the intelligence explosion.
What I'm hearing there is that
Impossible.
because the AI will be able to improve itself and train itself, it will be getting better at everything at once, and then it will be released at once.
I can't.
But it's not even exactly that, because even if it's mostly just getting better at the things that it's learning, like research, that'll have some spillover effects to other skills as well. And then when it turns to focusing on those other skills, it'll be able to do them very fast.
So will jobs remain in such a scenario, do you think?
I think that's actually a political question, not a technical question. Because on a technical level, all the jobs can be done by the AIs if they've reached that level. So there'd be some sort of political conversation about like what we're going to allow and disallow.
I mean, in this scenario, the humans are still controlling them, the AIs.
Depends on what you mean by control, right? So do the AIs actually have the goals and values that we want them to have? And are they going to robustly do that and behave as intended into the future? And then there's like, are they obeying your orders for now?
Are they obeying you?
There's a period of like several years where they're still obeying orders, and they're taking some jobs but not other jobs, and they're helping to make better weapons that the U.S. government can use to like do its arms race with China and so forth. And able to get so much power so quickly is because the governments and the corporations and so forth trust them and is deliberately deploying them into all of these positions because it thinks that things are fine. But because these things are neural nets, you can't just like look inside and see what it's really thinking. You can't really tell.
I think this is a really important point because theoretically, with AI, you're saying that we don't know why making the decisions that it's making.
One note of optimism is that it doesn't like there's a subfield of machine learning called mechanistic interpretability, and a broader subfield called interpretability more generally, that's trying to solve that problem and trying to take these trained artificial neural nets and piece them apart and understand and how the decisions are being made, so to speak. The problem is just it's a very inherently hard problem. If you have 10 trillion connections to look at, you can look at any particular group of them and be like, okay, so this is how like this particular connection works. But, like, how do you get a sense of the whole? You know, how do you get a sense of like what's happening at a high level? And if they can make enough progress, then we're in a very different and much brighter, much less likely for us to get into.
I can't carry anymore.
If we could just actually see where AIs were thinking. So we would still have the other problems to think about, but at least we'd be most Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just like obviously a dangerous thing to do. But because of the history of how the field has developed in the last 10 years, where people were like, oh wow, yeah, watch out, this is dangerous. Now they're in this race, where they're racing each other. Political pressure, pretend that it's not as bad as it seems, because they don't want to anger their investors, they don't want to anger the White House.
The question I had from our audience was, which, and I kind of asked you this in part, that which jobs are genuinely likely to survive AI, and what skills should people go for? But like, you have but yes, I think that was smart engineers and as they run the and you can try to guess at what those areas might be. Maybe stuff that's more like judges potentially. What about
I think stuff like it's, even if there's a robot nanny that's like really, really good, I think a bunch of people might prefer to have an actual human because they might be freaked out by the idea of a really good robot. Stuff that might be legally correct, maybe robots. Some people say have been more now. They've like automated some things, but not everything. But we are talking about a hypothetical future situation. So there isn't any need that the AI couldn't also do. Except if it's like protected by regulations. That's also. But so like, for example, right now there's this sort of like cycle where, you know,
I need a key.
the AI is going to do a certain thing, like write copy. And then humans who used to do that switch to managing AIs, or switch
It's
to doing
locked.
the other stuff that AIs can't do. And that's why then whatever that new job is that you might have switched to, AIs can do.
Do you think people are getting a little bit complacent? Because what I'm seeing on my timeline is a lot of people saying, I told you so. I told you everything would be fine. And when you look at the US unemployment rate, currently it's flat to slightly down. If you look at the UK, it is up.
I need a key.
The trend is up compared to last year. We're at about 5% unemployment. The US is at 4.2% unemployment.
Yeah. Basically, nobody has said that they're going to have something. Because of dynamics, we just the massive
business
Greetings.
of its final job. AI automates the job of the human AI researchers themselves and begins the machine learning
Impossible.
research to upgrade and build the next generation of AIs.
Yeah. So again, timelines.